Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Northshire Presents virtual event. My name is D'Vaughn Wood. I'm the events manager at Northshire's Manchester, Vermont location, and I'm here as so often with my good friend and colleague, Rachel Person, events manager at Northshire's Saratoga Springs location. We've got a great event for you tonight, but just a few things first before I hand things over to Rachel to introduce our authors. We are recording this event for later broadcast on our YouTube channel. And please, at any time tonight, type your questions into the Q&A box, a little function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will pose them for you. We'd be happy to do so. And finally, just a note of thanks. It's never a good time to be an independent bookstore. It's always a little challenging, and the last couple of years particularly so. So we could not still be here without your continued support, and we are truly grateful for it. Rachel, take things away.
Thank you so much, David. I'm so very happy to get to be the one to welcome these three authors to our screens this evening. I truly enjoyed the three books that we're discussing tonight, so it's a real treat to get to introduce them. Chencia C. Higgins won a Romance Slam Jam Emma Award for her debut paranormal romance, Janine, His True Alpha. She's with us tonight to talk about her latest book, D'Vaughn Kris Plan a Wedding. Joanna Lowell's debut, The Duke Undone, was called Lushly Dark and Seductive by Entertainment Weekly. She's with us tonight to talk about her follow-up novel, The Runaway Duchess. In addition to writing, she teaches in the English department at Wake Forest University. And Mona Shroff joined us last spring for a virtual event in honor of her book, Then There Was You. And she's back tonight to talk about her latest book, The 5-Day Reunion, the start to her new Once Upon a Wedding series. I'd love it if all three of you would start us off by talking a little bit about your newest book for people who might not be familiar with it. And so I thought we'd go in alphabetical order. So Chencia, you will go first, and then Joanna and Mona.
Sure, thank you so much. I'm Chencia C. Higgins, and my latest release, D'Vaughn Kris Plan a Wedding, came out in January, and it is a sapphic Black romance about two women who go on a reality TV show where they have to convince their family and friends that they're getting married in 6 weeks. And if they make it to the altar, they can each win $100,000. So there are some challenges that take place, and they start to have feelings for one another, which can kind of ruin the show. So we just follow that journey along with them to get to that happily ever after.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here with everyone, and thanks to Northshire. I was just saying this in the virtual green room, I guess, backstage, that Northshire is my hometown bookstore because I grew up near Manchester, Vermont, and so it's just like an author dream come true to get to be here with all of you. It's really exciting. So The Runaway Duchess is a Victorian romance set in England, and it follows a spoiled high society girl who, due to her family's straitened circumstances, her father committed some financial and other sorts of malfeasance. And so, you know, she has this big fall from grace, and her family's finances are ruined. She's forced to marry a really loathsome duke. And for reasons of his degrading behavior, but also a secret that she can't reveal, she's increasingly thinking that she has to escape a situation. And so after the marriage, they are traveling by train to Cornwall for the honeymoon, and she crosses the train platform, and suddenly out of the bushes bounds an incredibly handsome, roughly garbed young man who mistakes her for a world-traveling botanist named Muriel Pendrake. And Lavinia has a split second to decide whether or not she will cast off her own identity and steal someone else's. And she does. That's the spoiler. The book is sort of there tramping along in Cornwall, botanizing, and the hero is a sunshine hero. I'm sort of learning as I immerse myself more fully in like the romance community and reading and writing romance about different tropes, you know, and different types of character. And so he's a sunshine hero, and it's a sort of mistaken identity tale where Lavinia, the heroine, in assuming someone else's, you know, by taking over someone else's life, she starts to learn more about her own.
So thank you again to Northshire for having us. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Mona Shroff, and I'm talking today about the 5-day reunion. So the 5-day reunion is the first in my special edition Once Upon a Wedding series. And as we move forward, they are all standalones. The Once Upon a Wedding is simply an implication that each book touches a wedding in somehow. And the way that the 5-day reunion touches a wedding is that our hero Nikhil and our heroine Anita were married. And then after a couple of years of being married, they were divorced. And it's been about 3 years since their divorce. And now Nikhil's younger sister Tina is getting married. And it turns out that their mother never told anybody, like anybody, that they were divorced, particularly her ailing father. And so she decides to go to her former daughter-in-law, and she kind of gives her an offer she can't refuse, saying, I will make it worth your while if you come and pretend to be married to my son for the 5 days of this wedding, so that nobody picks up on it for right now, and I'll tell the truth later or whatever. But she just doesn't want to have to deal with it at the wedding. And so Anita, for various reasons, agrees. And the quick little chapter 1 spoiler there is that nobody told Nikhil she was coming. So she just sort of shows up, and now they have 5 days over the course of this wedding, in which they have to pretend they are a married couple sharing the same room and acting in public as if they've been married, and dealing with all of the questions that come with that for the past 5 years. And of course, along the way, figure out what went wrong and whether or not they still have feelings for it. It's a romance, so you can imagine where that ends up. So yeah, so it's a fake marriage.
Lovely. Thank you, all three of you, for those great introductions to your work. All three of your books do a really lovely job of exploring family dynamics, both some difficult ones and some really loving ones. And I wondered if you could talk more about the importance of family in romance novels, outside of that central romantic relationship, those loving family bonds.
Well, for me, I see family as so important because community is so important, especially to romance, because no one, like, you're not going to make it through this love story on your own. You need someone to tell you when you're being an idiot, and you need someone to tell you when you guys have had the miscommunication. You need someone to tell you, yes, they're in love with you, duh, how can't you see it? So what better than your family to be the ones to tell you, because they know you better than anyone else. And so that's why I love the family dynamic in romance novels.
I wish when I teach in a different kind of Zoom configuration, you can put up reactions like hearts and laughing faces and thumbs up. And while everyone's been talking, I keep wanting to put up like hearts, like laughing faces, thumbs up. Yeah, no, I feel the same way. I feel like community is so important, and no one is gonna, we're all interdependent. We shouldn't be trying to make it through this life alone. And whether that means you have a pair bonded romantic relationship, or really deep extended, kinship networks, or sort of however you make family, I think it's really important. And romance celebrates that. And I love romances where the characters, because most romances do show, two people forming a lasting romantic relationship. But I love it when those two people aren't becoming sort of like more insular and closed off from the world, when by the end of the romance, you see them more connected to other people through, their friendships, their, maybe chosen family or biological family. But I think that romances center emotional relationships of all kinds. And it's the genre that really does that and honors that in a, larger society that really sees emotionality and relationality is less important. And so, for me, family, however you define it, is really key. And at the end of a romance, for me to feel satisfied, the world of that main sort of couple unit has to feel bigger and more interconnected.
So I I completely agree with my two fellow colleagues here. I think family is super important, because I think there's kind of that teenage Romeo and Juliet sort of notion that used to be, where you're like, the couple is sort of this little island and it's like us against the world. And, I mean, yeah, it's very sort of dramatic and romantic and everything, but it isn't real. And that's part of the reason why I include families in it, because real life is your family. So you are getting, you're going to be with somebody, you're going to be affected by their siblings, their parents, their cousins. If they have family, then you're making a new family together, essentially. So you can't leave them out of any story, and I certainly didn't leave them out of any of my books, because they are integral. And the relationships that we form with sort of the family members of that hero or heroine are also really important, and they also form us, even though we might have those a little bit later in life. And so in Nikhil and Nita's situation, when they were married and divorced, so when they divorced, everyone is affected. It's just not the two of them, right? So both families are affected by that. And I tried to touch on that a little bit, because those relationships were also pained and they also needed to be healed, in addition to our sort of main relationship that we're looking at right now. So yeah, I think that I think the three of us are basically saying that no couple is kind of an island, right? You came from somewhere, and in fact, the happily ever after is almost more happily ever after and ever after if you have those strong sort of additional relationships in addition to what you have centrally there. So
it was one of the commonalities that I noticed in all three of your books as I was reading, is that each of you had sort of one character who had very specific reasons to be sort of yearning towards the other character's family. And I was really moved by that, by seeing that sort of over and over in your books. It was quite lovely. You also another commonality that I noticed is that you were all dealing in different ways with compressed timelines, with romances that had to happen within a sort of short window. And that always seems to me like it's a really hard thing to pull off as a writer, to have that emotional growth of a relationship without a whole lot of time. And I wondered how each of you approached that in your writing.
I'll go first again. So it was built into like the story, right? They have these 6 weeks to get to the wedding. They have to plan this wedding in 6 weeks. So yes, it can be very difficult to make it realistic, right? I mean, it's fiction, but still people want to believe it. They're like, the timeline is kind of quick. But I mean, we also know that it can happen that fast in real life. I'm sure somebody, we all know someone we know someone who's known someone who their parents met, and then like within, 2-3 weeks, they're like, we're in love, we're getting married. And then, like 9 months later, here they came. So it's like, and 30-40 years later, they're still married. So we know like it's a thing that's possible, but making it realistic and showing that this isn't just like, I want to say instant love, but I also don't, because like I love instant love, like that, like I said, in the green room, right? Like that's one of my like bread and butters. That's my catnip, like instant love. But everybody doesn't like that. So you gotta like work with it so slow. You can't have a real slow burn when you've got this short timeline, but you got to show the build. So it's really like the building. So they start with like a nugget of like attraction, because that's believable. You meet someone, you're like, oh, they look good, I like this. And then you like slowly like build on it, like making a truffle. Like you're like slowly dipping it in chocolate over and over until it's like this ball. You're like, this is amazing. So that's like, for me, that's how I approach that. Like we start with something small and we just have to build over it. And sure, we're building on it kind of quickly, but it gets time to set. You really just need a little bit of time for each layer to set, and then it's good.
Okay, thinking about writing as making a truffle is my new favorite metaphor for writing. That's so great. I mean, I teach writing at Wake Forest. I teach creative writing classes, and I think for all writers, fiction writers, novelists, it's dealing with time is really difficult, and it's harder to think about and talk about than it is to think and talk about character or setting or these things that feel sort of more tangible, but like the clock of a story, and how the scope, how that feels. I mean, you have books that are set all in one day, like Mrs. Dalloway, right? I mean, but with romance, because it's like the characters are supposed to go through these like just like soul wrenching, life changing, just like dredging up everything that's like dark from their past and all of their wounds. And there's this like amazing like growth that each person has to undergo as they form this like, star bond together. I mean, it's like really intense emotional stuff. And so it is kind of hard to like think about, how do you make that, feel like there's enough duration. But as you're sort of dealing with like, what do you show in scene versus you don't want to abridge too much, because the stuff in romance that I think people are really excited about are those interactions that you want to see on the page. So you don't want to hear like, oh, over 2.5 months, they saw each other now and again. You want to be like, what was the dynamic? And so I feel like there's like always a pressure to make the book feel like there's more duration, but also a desire not to abridge any of the good stuff, which would be when they see each other. So I feel like books, romance novels that kind of have a longer timeline often do it by having like the characters be apart for 3 months, and then the scene is like when they come back together. So I always struggle writing romances with making the timeline like feel long enough. Like I'll be writing it and I'll be like, wow, I think they met on Monday, and I think it's Thursday, so I try to like build in more time, because the short answer is I think dealing with time as a writer is really tricky, and I have not figured it out. And my tendency is to realize that it's only been 5 days and I've written like 300 pages. So I'm always trying to come up with ways of like slowing things down, not succeeding yet.
So I only had 5 days in this book for the wedding, but there are 2 events every day. And so I knew I wanted to do the wedding thing, and I knew I wanted to do a fake relationship. So I cheated, and I had them married before the book started, and I had them divorced. So the attraction is already, it's built in, right? So that attraction is right there. It's right there, chapter 1. When he sees her, he's pissed, but why else would he be pissed if he didn't still have feelings for her, right? It's still a strong feeling, right? She also has strong feelings. So I didn't have to worry about them. I didn't have to get them to fall in, like have insta love, because it was already in place. It was just that there was a lot of baggage there. So they still had to do a lot of their growing. And I gave them time I also gave them, 2 or 3 years since they had divorced. So they have had time to grow as humans individually by themselves. Which is another thing that I'm really a fan of when I write, like I did that, especially in Then There Was You, that they should be individuals before they're together. Like they should be okay in themselves before they get together. So off the page, they had 3 years to get themselves together. So when you see them, they are who they are already. And then you can go back in time with a few flashbacks and see who they used to be. And you can see the growth that way. And then you see the growth of their relationship and all of the bonds that they have to fix from what their actions were, like why were they divorced and all of that that's happening. So 5 days is still a short amount of time to overcome like all of those things. But I felt like with that initial attraction and that love already in place, it was just a matter of getting them to be brave enough and open enough to see the other person with older, more mature eyes type of thing. And so that's kind of that was sort of what I did to make it into 5 days, which is the opposite of like Then There Was You, because there were some bigger issues that had to be dealt with, and those could not be dealt with in like a week or a month. So I literally had like 9 months go by over the course of that book And I think I did exactly what Joanna said. I would be like, she's been walking into the bar for 3 weeks and she's more attracted to him than like every day. Like, and then I would like let more time go by and, just kind of catch the reader up on what had been going on, like that they were friends now and that kind of thing. Cause they don't want to see them doing that every day, but you want to know that happened, that relationship was more slowly developed because there were such bigger issues going on, which was different than the 5-day reunion. So I think, I felt like I cheated a little because I was like, oh, they used to be in love, so you don't have to worry about that. And and here we are for 5 days. So I think it just depends on, I think, what kind of story you want to tell. And then there's always a way to figure out that timeline.
Thanks. There's an audience question here I received that says, for all of you, I know that research is necessary for both contemporary novels and historical fiction. Can you each talk a bit about your research process?
Okay. Research just for like this book, or was like overall research? I will.
I think overall either works, for your particular title or in general.
I'll talk about D'Vaughn Kris. So like for the research that I did for D'Vaughn Kris Plan a Wedding. So it is the structure, or I guess the foundation of it, is a reality TV show. And so I grew up watching like MTV Real World and Road Rules and stuff like that. So the reality TV that I think of is that stuff back then. So my research was really just like going back to like old episodes of that. It was really fun research, actually. It was like, oh, so messy. I loved that stuff. So go back and watch old episodes of that. Just because the one thing, like writing the love stuff, that's like, okay, I'm used to doing that. I can do that part. But like the reality TV show, like how the camera work and how the confessional type scenes work, especially the camera work. That's like the majority of the research that I did for D'Vaughn Kris Plan a Wedding. In general, I really researched like careers. I actually end up sometimes, and I'm sure this happens to a lot of other authors, maybe it's happening to you too, research like mundane things that like nobody else is going to pay attention to, and they read like what type of grass grows in this region. Like if they're going to have a picnic, I need to know like, oh, she put her hands in the grass. Was it crabgrass? Was it bluegrass? They're not going to pay attention to it, but I need to know for this time of year, for where they are in the state, in the city, and that kind of stuff. But that type of research can really just take you down a rabbit hole. And you're like, it's been 3 hours and I've only written 5 words. So I try to stick to the careers because that's the like easiest and shortest amount of research that's needed to be done.
Man, I live in those rabbit holes, and I'm also researching the grass around the rabbit holes and trying to figure out like what is particular about the rabbit hole. It's my process is so much like that. And there are definitely, I think, moments where I realize that I'm like hiding from the writing by researching. But then also it's hard to not feel like you have the details to give you that like feeling of verisimilitude. Right. I write historical. And so my books are set in the late Victorian period. And so, I mean, everything from like what kinds of coaches were people rattling around in, to like what were people wearing, and what is like the tenor of speech, and like all of those things. They don't sort of like come naturally, though I have to say, if I wrote contemporary, I would probably have to do as much research because I feel like I'm such a weirdo. I'm like, I would have to be, what do people do in 2020? But I read a lot of primary sources on the time period, like sort of depending on the book. Like for the Runaway Duchess, the characters are sort of natural scientists. Well, one of them is, kind of an imposter, but one of them is a natural scientist. I read, read a lot about botany because it matters for a character. Like if one character is supposed to be a botanist, they are going to notice the different kinds of grasses, and so you kind of have to, sort of have that information to hand. Or for the Duke Undone, it's set in the Royal Academy of Art, and so I read a lot of documents about what the course structures were like at the Royal Academy of Art, and diaries of students and things like that. And then I also like to read novels. from the period or about the period, because I feel like it's, you know, we write and our books are in conversation with other books. And so for The Runaway Duchess, which is set in Cornwall, I reread a lot of Daphne du Maurier, whose novels are set in Cornwall, and they're just like really like very wonderful. I think her most famous book is Rebecca. So she writes, you know, Gothic horror, but she writes all kinds of, she writes sort of romances, she writes all kinds of things. So, you know, I sort of like picked up some of her scenes. So my research process is like a very big part of the writing, sometimes too big a part of the writing, and it's just like ongoing. I will, oh, you know, the thing where you're like, oh, what is, they're having a picnic, and then you spend 3 hours figuring out the grass. Like, I'm always trying to balance the writing and the research. I do think the research is important, and sometimes while researching, you get to some detail which you're like, oh, now you see the whole scene, or like it gives you an idea for something else. So sometimes the research actually propels the writing. So it's just a constant tension, but it's super fun. And so I have to say, it's like one of my favorite parts. And I really, you know, as a kid, loved reading Victorian novels, and the research is one of the reasons why I like writing in that time period. Like I find that history really interesting.
So I do agree. I think writing contemporary, you have to do a little bit less research than that. So I also do mostly my research on the careers. And what was nice about the 5-day reunion is they killed a writer. So that worked. And Anita was a lawyer, and I have quite a few friends who are lawyers, and I can call them up and ask them. And anytime I have a medical thing, I have a bunch of friends who are doctors, and I ask them about those kinds of things. I do a lot of Google. I do get stuck down in the rabbit hole, but I think I get stuck in the rabbit hole because I'm trying not to write that. Like I'm avoiding that because it just gets a little bit overwhelming. Sometimes I do so much research and I have all this information, and now I just don't know what to do with it. Yeah, I basically want to know, I do most of my research on things that my characters are spending most of their time doing. So if they are, you know, 20s, 30s, they're working or they're in school or something like that, those are the things that I'm going to research, because that's what you're going to read about. Like they're going, one of them's a teacher, and so they're teaching and that kind of thing. And some of their growth comes from being whatever their career is, that kind of thing. So, but I agree that you can get really lost in your research. So my research is a combo of Google and who can I call that I know that does this, because I love having the conversation. I have a firefighter book coming out in this summer, and that was inspired by a firefighter that I know, an Indian firefighter that I know, and like I don't really know any Indian people who are firefighters, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. So I spent some time chatting with him about like the different things that he went through and what it was like for him to tell his parents and all that kind of thing. And I put that, you know, so it was a little bit more realistic when I was writing it, other than like what I might imagine it was like to be. And then also you get to do things like watch Chicago Fire. And then for the 5-day reunion, I watched The Proposal, and I watched how To All the Boys I've Met Before. And, you know, I watched all those fake ones to see like just the timing of it. Like, how are they, that goes back to like how long your thing is, like, what are they doing in like each moment? Like how many types of interactions are they having, so that you kind of hit like the beats, I guess, right? So yeah, so sometimes research is just reading another book or watching Chicago Fire, watching the fires happen. So, yeah.
Being able to talk to friends and getting sort of research advice is really awesome. And I do think that is hard as a historical writer. Like I had in the Duke Undone, there's all of this complicated stuff about codicils to a will and Victorian like legal shenanigans. And I have a friend who's a lawyer, and I kept asking him all these questions, and finally he was like, it's the 20th century, I'm an immigration attorney, like I can't help you with this. And I was like, oh. Okay. I mean, it was still great to talk to him, but yeah, it's like slightly different. I'm like, I talk to a doctor who'd be like, yeah, I don't know what they were doing in hospitals in 1876.
Right. It's a lot harder, I think, when you're doing this.
Or you could have good conversations, but maybe they're not like as directly useful.
I do think all of your research processes sound very fun in their own ways. And actually, Joanna, I just finished a book where that's set in the 50s, and Daphne du Maurier, the person, has a cameo in it, and it's super fun.
You'll have to tell me this book.
It's called Bloomsbury Girls by Natalie Jenner, and I'll email you
Thank
a link to it because it's delightful. And like it made me want to go back and reread her books because it's been so long. And I was like, she's such a character. I need to read her. Anyway, I have some specific questions for you guys about your books sort of individually. And I'll actually start off, Joanna, with my question for you because it sort of ties into what you were saying. I really enjoyed the importance of the natural world and all of the science of that time period in your book. Can you tell us a little bit more for people who don't know about what botany was and what it was like in the time period of your novel?
The actual sort of botanical world that the main character Neil is in, and Lavinia is actually not because she's a fraud, but that Neil is in, is where he's not like a university trained botanist. He's somebody who's working for a nursery company. And so in England, there were sort of one in particular, Vetch Nurseries, a very large nursery, and they sold all sorts of plants, sort of house plants, and also plants that would get cultivated in gardens. And they sent botanists around a world sort of collecting plants. And so Neil was a plant collector. And so there's like there's a really complicated relationship there that if there's another book that I'm writing is going to deal a little bit more with some of those pathways and the ways that they connect to British imperialism. But it was like an age of like scientific discovery. So there was a lot of sort of shifting from natural history, which was sort of people who would identify that way might look to a kind of sort of like a Christian worldview and see like the glorification of nature as part of almost like theological work. And then people who were getting like increasingly from Darwin on sort of more and more interested in like plant morphology and kind of getting more experimental about their approaches. And women were seen as hobbyists. Like it was an acceptable hobby for women to go out and collect flowers and have flower albums. But it was considered very suspect for a woman to think too much about how plants reproduced or anything that might seem overly sexual. So there's this kind of like tension where women were going out and sometimes corresponding with very highly respected male botanists, sending them samples, actually supporting their work a great deal, but kind of like kept out of all of the scientific societies, not credited, not able to sort of publish their scientific papers as regularly. So there's like a kind of interesting, frustrating and I guess probably obvious. We sort of like know that the history of its sort of relationship of women to botany at the time. So the real botanist who's the person Lavinia is impersonating, Muriel Pendrake. If she gets a book, that'll get to that'll be developed more, and that's something that I'm working toward right now.
I hope Muriel Pendrake gets a book because when she showed up, I thought she was delightful.
Oh, thank you.
So I definitely would enjoy her book. Chencia, I loved the reality TV setting of your book. It was so much fun. And I loved that the crew wound up sort of influencing the storyline in various ways. And I wondered if that's something that you planned on or if that was something that surprised you as you were writing the book.
You mean like the Instant I Do crew?
Yes.
It kind of just happened. It was not in the plan at all. And I actually went back recently and reread the synopsis, and it was not in there at all. So I was like, I don't know how it just happened. But it kind of makes sense that would happen, right? And then, thinking about how my research was to watch old like MTV Road Rules and Real World and that kind of stuff. And I can remember like them having conversations with people off camera, right? I mean, it was recorded, but they're talking to people off camera and you can hear, they would have the captions of someone we can't see saying something, hey, you can't do that, or this and that and the other. So we know they interacted with these people. And so it just kind of was a natural thing that happened because you're around these people so much you know, in 6 weeks, and I don't know how long, or I can't remember exactly how long they would be around them during, you know, those early like reality TV shows. But in this one, you know, 6 weeks, they're around these people and they're kind of like there a lot. And so they're watching you, even when the camera's not necessarily on you, or the main camera's not on you. They're watching you, they're learning you. And you know, just like you can develop feelings for this person who you're supposed to be in love with, you can develop like, you know, friendships and stuff. And so when you have friends, you want to tell them, okay, baby, you messing up. What are you doing? And so it just kind of happened naturally.
Awesome, thank you. Mona, cooking and food are really important throughout your book. And it sounds like they're going to be pretty significant in your next book also. Can you talk about how your characters connect through food?
Yeah, so Anita and Nikhil are actually, they're very good cooks. And one of the things, you know, because they were married and when they come together, one of the things I wanted them to have something that they could touch back on, that was something that they enjoyed doing together, that would kind of bring back like a memory for them type of thing. And you know, so they used to love cooking together. So the cooking part of that was kind of like when they're happy and they're together, they were cooking, and when they're not happy and together, they're not cooking. And so I think I tried to use it just as like a parallel for their relationship a little bit, so they would remember how they used to cook. And then slowly you can see, like by the end, they're actually in sync again and cooking, because they cook a few times and it's not in sync. So I think in a relationship where you're sort of like in tune to each other, you can do something like move around a kitchen well. And because you can predict the other person's movement, you know what's being made, they can predict you kind of have your roles, and it's almost a little dance that you do in the kitchen, like you can do it. And it's not just for couples, like this is how I learned how to cook. Like I know how to handle I know what the rhythm is in the kitchen when I'm with my mom, or when I'm with my sisters-in-law, like, or with my brother, like, we have a certain rhythm, and same with my daughter. And so I just tried to put that into Anita and Nikhil's relationship, so that the more off they were from each other, the further away from being together they were. And once they were back in sync, then they were together. And food is always just, I mean, food is a huge part of a wedding. So there was no way to get around not having the food, not having, you know, just even talking about the food and the drink and all of that. You have to have somebody get drunk at some point at a wedding. So I think that's where I was going with the cooking for them. And then in the next book, both characters are actually chefs. One's a pastry chef and one is a chef, and they're chefs for weddings. And so they have their own story, but there's a lot of food in that one too, and a lot of cooking, and I think I just extended that sort of kitchen dance to this couple because they're always in a kitchen together. And so that was one of the, like, a tool that I was using, because food was already readily available at the wedding, and it also takes them back to their past and the rest of their family. It's also food is so family. So it was just another way to bring about those relationships, I guess.
Sorry, I thought, I would love it if you would each talk a little bit about romance tropes that you particularly love or particularly don't like, both as a reader and as a writer.
Okay. I'll go first. I'll start with tropes that I don't like. It's not a lot. But, well, I won't say that I don't like. My least favorite, we'll say that, because I've read some that I enjoyed. But my least favorite, A Secret Baby is my least favorite. I have read some that I enjoy, but that's usually not my jam. Tropes that I love, marriage of convenience, fake relationship, enemies to lovers. It's like, I love it. Those are some of my faves. And usually just about anything that includes some instant love is gonna be a fave of mine.
I don't know if this is a trope, but listening to Mona talk, I'm like, is kitchen rhythms a trope? Because kitchen rhythms, like kitchen dance, is like that is something that I really love. And I mean, I just there's something like so intimate about it, but also yeah, just so familiar. It's awesome. So kitchen rhythms is one of my tropes. I think this is sort of showing, I think, my age or like the aging process, because I think when I was young, I didn't like second chance or like second attachment, because I still had that maybe like, I don't know, like Sense and Sensibility, like Marianne kind of like, there are no second attachments, like you're young and you're in love or whatever. And you just want that sort of like intense original connection. And now that I'm older, I'm like, I really like second chance and second attachment and the sort of, you know, something that feels like it's like embedded in like real experience and like maturity and pain and like the risk that comes with trying something again with your eyes open, knowing it can fail, like all of that stuff that like as a kid, I'm like, you want something that feels more like, like the fairy tale. So now I like sort of my own evolution as a romance reader. I really like that now. And I didn't long ago. And a trope that I think gets a really bad name is miscommunication. The idea that like if characters just talked about a thing, like the book wouldn't go on for like 150 more pages. Why didn't they just have a conversation? And that, I can get frustrated with that in romance. But then also sometimes I get frustrated with critics of that, who then maybe expect that like people just communicate directly, because we don't, and that's often how. And also you're writing a book, and so you're creating these sorts of delays. So anyway, so the way miscommunication is handled, but I love enemies to lovers. I love fake dating, fake marriage, mistaken identity, forced proximity, only one bed. I mean, all of that stuff. And I like romance novelists who approach the tropes with some humor, like a sort of metafictional awareness that a trope is a trope, which I think I see increasingly. Like there's so much fun discussion of tropes that people are kind of, writing these tropey books because it's fun. And I think that's a really cool thing about romance and the model of romance, as opposed to some like literary fiction or genres that are like, we are all about originality. When romance novelists, I think, are like celebrating this sort of like collaborative spirit where people are like borrowing the same kinds of like ideas and motifs and tropes and like making new stuff out of it. And I really love that. I feel like there's something about it. It's like more like a recipe, it's like you make it a little different, but it's like we're all using the same ingredients, and there's something that feels really homey about it, and like a kitchen dance to come full circle. So
so I like I said in the green room earlier, I do love a good fake relationship, that whole angsty thing of like, we're pretending, but now I'm starting to have feelings. Does the other person have feelings? I don't know, because they're still pretending. Is that real? But like that whole question of like, who's still pretending? I love that. And I love watching it. I love reading it. And this was my first time writing it. I didn't realize how much I love second chance until I realized that I wrote a bunch of second chance books here. So, and actually my first one is A Secret Baby Second Chance. And, that was my debut. But I don't know that I have another secret baby in me, but I probably have more second chances. I think I just love the angst of that second chance, because as I said earlier, like as soon as the hero and heroine are in the same space together, there's already tension, because there's something that happened in the past that the reader doesn't know about and wants to know about, and then wants them to get over it and get back together again. And there's just something about that it has always attracted me. And I think I do like writing a little bit older characters. When I first started my journey of writing, my daughter was about 16 years old. And the one thing she said to me was, she's like, please do not write about teenagers. She's like, nobody wants to read about that. And I'm like, well, there's an entire YA industry that begs you to be wrong. But her, as a 16-year-old, she actually really loved, oh my God, now I'm going to forget, Major somebody's Last Stands. You know, I can't think of the name of the book, but it was like an older couple. It wasn't a romance novel per se, but the couple that was in there was maybe in their 60s. And she, as a 16-year-old, loved it. And so ever since then, I find if I'm trying to write a little bit older, like 30s and above, then I'm not writing sort of the young adult or even that new adult. That second chance is right there. Major Pettigrew, thank you. Major Pettigrew's Last Stand. And it's almost built in, because by the time you hit your 30s, you've had a relationship somewhere. So that second chance sort of plays into it. And there's probably more second chances coming, because I'm trying to get my characters to be even older. So we'll see.
Yeah. Romance as a genre is seeing a lot of change and upheaval in the last few years. Everything from radical changes in cover design and trim size to the long overdue start of progress toward building a more diverse genre. What do you think of where the genre is now, and where would you like to see things go from here?
Well,
okay.
What do I like the direction romance is going. It hasn't always been a very inclusive genre. And it is becoming more that, and I'm pretty certain that is because self-publishing is kind of forcing traditional publishing to become more inclusive, because they're seeing how popular a lot of these tropes and the way people are written, how that is. And so now, traditional publishing is like, oh, I guess we can let you guys write this kind of stuff. And so that's great, seeing more marginalized voices coming out and are able to publish, and we're seeing people of color on covers, and it's great, and they're selling, and that is a fantastic thing, because those stories have been out there and now they're getting to be published. And so I love that, and there's not enough of that, and so I'm hoping that there's more of that. The stories coming out of marginalized communities actually being told by marginalized voices, that I want to see more of, for sure.
Yeah, and just to echo that, I mean, it seems like, I remember, romance, like walking from my dad's pizza shop when I was like, it's like in the early 90s, to the library where they would be selling like, 10-cent romances, like, I would like fill bags with them. And, it was like blonde damsels, like after blonde damsels, right? And so, I never found a queer romance. I never found a romance by a writer of color. And I think even if you go to a bookstore these days, or like a book library, that like getting rid of romance, you're going to see something by Jasmine Guillory. You're going to see, there are more and more, I think, books getting published by the mainstream, like Chencia is saying, I think in part because pressure from writers, pressure from readers, pressure from self-publishing, not necessarily like, I think the industry, there's a lot of gatekeeping. There's a lot of, resistance to change. But I do think it's changing. And I think it has to change more in all of, in those directions to, continue to lift up stories and, that have always been there, have always been getting told, and giving more of a platform to those voices. And hopefully we're going to keep moving in that direction. Because, people want it, readers want it, writers want it.
Yeah, so I would probably echo that. I was just thinking about when I first went on sub. So I was on sub in 2017 for the first time. I just gotten my agent, and I remember I was at a conference. Remember when we used to go to conferences, and with a panel of agents and editors, and I remember asking I remember one of the editors had answered another question about why aren't there more sort of diverse romances, and I had gotten this response when I was looking for an agent as well, and the response was, well, basically, we don't know where to put it. Like, what are your comps? Like, where would we shelve this book, right? And I asked them, I was like, well, honestly, it's a romance novel. You probably shelve it under S for Shroff, because that's where it goes. And I think I'm like, how do you know that it's not going to sell and that there's no audience for it until you put it out there, right? It's like that build it and they will come type of thing. And I think they're finally getting around to that, and they're starting to build it, and people are coming. And I just wanted to make a comment on what you said about our covers. This was my debut cover right here, and I don't know if you can see it very well. This is Then Now Always. This is Indian models that they hired to do this, right? There's no stock photography here. They actually, Harlequin paid models to do this one. They paid models to do this one. And when my editor had asked me, she's like, what do you want on your cover? Like, what are your thoughts? I had no thought about a cover. The only thing I said was, I want representation, and please, Then Now Always, there's no wedding involved. Please, can we not put henna hands on the front of that thing, because there's no henna in it. And I still remember when I revealed this cover, I still remember on Twitter, people were like, oh my God, there's an Indian woman wearing jeans on a cover. We've never seen that before. And I was like shocked. I was like, because you know what? Indian women wear jeans. I'm just saying, we do all around the world. So I think they're starting to come a long way. And it's sometimes it's baby steps, and sometimes we make progress, and then sometimes we fall back. But I'm really excited about what I am seeing, and I just want it to get better. I just want it to become even more and more. I don't want it to be like a phenomenal thing. Oh my God, can you believe they hired Indian models to do an Indian person's cover? Like, we shouldn't be shocked by that. And I'm waiting for that day, and I have my covers everywhere, because I've been very pleased with the cover art that's been coming in my way. So, and I think that's a huge step from someone saying, well, I love your book, I just don't know where to shelve it.
Anecdotally, I will say that customers in Northshire's romance section, this is what they want. They want more diversity. They want diverse models on the covers. That's what sells for us. So I don't know if that's true universally, but I think that pressure from readers certainly helps too. And hopefully will keep helping move things forward. We are sadly just about out of time, but I would love it if each of you could wrap up by telling us quickly what you're working on next. What's coming up next for you?
Well, the other two ladies have already talked about the books they're working on next. I'm working on a couple of different things. I'm not exactly certain if I can say yet what I'm working on, but I am working on something. I have some more sapphic romance, but also have some het romance coming as well.
We will look forward to the something, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in edits for my next book, which is coming out, I think, in December, and it's called Artfully Yours, and it's about an art forger and an art critic. And yeah, it's a book I wrote during the pandemic. It's been a complete mess. I've like rewritten it so many times, but I think it's like finally becoming a thing, and so that's exciting. I don't know if you both find this, that some books just like are hard, and some books come easier. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I'm just, I don't know if it correlates to quality or anything. It's just sometimes like the book feels like a fight, and sometimes it like, you're like, oh, this is amazing. I don't know. It's a hard one.
They're all, they feel like they're all hard to me.
Yeah, ultimately, yeah, that.
So I mentioned earlier, the second book in the Once Upon a Wedding series is Matched by Masala, that comes out in June, and that is the heroine's brother and her best friend. So that's the trope there, and they're both chefs, and that's their story. I also have my third HQN book coming out in August, and that's the firefighter one. And I did just sign a few weeks ago another 3-book contract with Special Edition for 3 more books in the Once Upon a Wedding series. So my current work in progress is The Runaway Bride. And I think probably the one after that is going to be The Groom She Left Behind. And then we'll see what that third one's going to be. So yeah, so that's kind of what I'm working on now. So I have a couple more releases this year. In fact, I just did a cover reveal for Matched by Masala, and again, they did a beautiful cover for that one. So I'm really excited for that to come out in the next couple of months.
Chencia, Joanna, Mona, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. This has been a real delight. We really appreciate it. You can find all of their books online at northshire.com. I put the links in the chat, and we'll see you all at another Northshire Presents event soon. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye.